Welcome to a holiday special of the Media Row podcast with me, your host as always, Justin Miller. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on your day off. It warms my heart that you have a full day off and you choose to spend it here with us at Media Row. I hope you had a safe and fun Thanksgiving. I know we did, where we ate way too much food as planned. And then just watched so much basketball. Of course, the NFL games. And then, of course, Megan and I had to get caught up on the final season of Stranger Things as well. So it was a jam-packed Thanksgiving, but great to see the family. The food was wonderful, and I just hope everyone had as good of a Thanksgiving break as we did. So thank you guys again so much for your support. If you haven't yet, make sure to like and subscribe wherever you are viewing this podcast or listening. Wherever you get your podcast, we're there. And of course on YouTube. And then wherever you like to social media as well, make sure to give us a follow there at Media Row Pod. And I'm very thankful to all of you, and I'm also very thankful to our sponsor in Kelly's Little Nipper, 1701 East Grant Avenue in Des Moines. Love the people at Kelly's Little Nipper. They've been with us since day one, so really appreciate their support. Go support a nice local business like Kelly's Little Nipper and use that keyword in Woodley, and your first drink is on the house, courtesy of Media Row. So we have a busy show. I mean, these Friday shows just seem to get bigger and bigger each week, and we wouldn't have it any other way. We have playoff football to discuss with Drake taking on number 11 South Dakota in the FCS playoffs. They travel up to South Dakota once again. They are a faceless team and lost to the Coyotes in week 3. We'll break down that game, give kind of our keys and our thoughts on the game that could lead to Drake's success, as it is going to be a battle up there in South Dakota. And then we have more basketball to talk about, because we have the Emerald Coast Classic starting tonight at 8:30 as the Drake Bulldogs tip off against the LSU Tigers, the undefeated LSU Tigers. So that one should be really entertaining. The Drake's playing a lot better. They're on this 2-game winning streak. I don't care who they've played. They're looking better, and that's all you can ask for. And LSU, we don't really know how good this team is just yet. Yeah, they're 5-0, so they are good, but they really haven't been challenged yet. Drake will be kind of the first team to stack up and challenge this LSU squad. And then we'll finish off the show, as always, with our national college football picks. We have great rivalry games. Iowa taking on Nebraska today. And then, of course, we have Iowa State traveling to face Oklahoma State on Saturday. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. We have FCS playoffs. We have playoff football. Biggest game in this state. I know you're going to have Hawkeye fans talk about, no. It's Iowa, Nebraska. It's not. I'm sorry to tell you, that's not the biggest game in college football in the local area. Sure, rivalry game, bragging rights on the line. Nothing comes close to playoff football. This rivalry, if Iowa loses, they're still in a bowl game. It just sucks because you feel like you're better than Nebraska, and vice versa. If you win, great. Doesn't really change much. You're just playing for pride. So Drake, South Dakota, biggest game of the weekend here in this state. Drake traveling up to face the 11 seed South Dakota Coyotes at noon. Bulldogs, of course, just a quick overview for both teams. Bulldogs are Pioneer Football League champions, got into the FCS playoffs as an automatic qualifier with an 8-3 overall record, 7-1 conference record. And then Coyotes 8-4, 6-2 in a very difficult Missouri Valley Football Conference. I mean, if you watch that FCS playoffs, selection show last Sunday, when they bring up teams like South Dakota State that kind of struggled towards the end, or Illinois State that got blown out at the end, and they still got into the FCS playoffs, they kept mentioning on ESPN of, we get that you see their records of 8-4 and 7-5, and you may sit there and go, why are these teams getting into the FCS playoffs. Well, that's because the Missouri Valley Football Conference is absolutely loaded. When you have North Dakota State, who just re-signed their coach to a 7-year contract, so they're going to continue to be the absolute juggernaut in the FCS, or at least it appears so. But when you have teams like that, and Illinois State, South Dakota, this is an absolute stacked conference. So South Dakota going 6-2 is very impressive. 5-1 at home, and then you have this team rested and ready to go in the FCS playoffs because they're coming off of a bye, because they had that 5 overtime game where they beat Southern Illinois on November 15th, and then they got last week off. So that's kind of a quick overview. We're not going to, harp too much on week 3, as the last time these two teams faced off was just 2 months ago, where Drake fell 42-21. We'll talk a little bit about what Drake has to do better going forward. But man, I know Coach Woodley said he is rewatching as a coach, looking for anything to help them this weekend. Me personally, these two teams, especially Drake on the offensive end, they're so different from week 3, where I'm kind of putting that one aside. I truly am. I'm watching it. I rewatched it to get refamiliar, with the South Dakota team. But this Drake team, that was Logan Inagawa's first career start. You're not having Nick Herman. He didn't start playing until late in that second half when the game was basically over. And then you just have a defense that was still figuring itself out in the secondary. You just had a defense as a whole figuring itself out. So I know Coach on Wednesday, which if you missed that show, make sure before Saturday to go check out Wednesday's show, as Coach Woodley was absolutely fantastic. But I'm putting it aside. These two teams are too different. But before we get into what Drake has to improve on, and what are some of, in my opinions, the keys that Drake needs to do to be successful against South Dakota this weekend, let's jump into some of the Coyote players that you guys need to look out for and that are X factors and have been X factors all season long. And let's start with the most important position in college football and football as a whole. You have the quarterback, senior Aiden Bowman. Iowa State fans know him. He transferred from Iowa State. You go back to that November 15th, 5 overtime performance against Southern Illinois. 21 of 30, 300 yards, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. Aiden Bowman is very talented. And I know Iowa State controlled South Dakota and really dominated them in the early part of the season. Well, South Dakota has changed a lot too. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is the confidence and the control that Aiden Bowman has under center. He doesn't turn over the ball a whole lot. He doesn't, he's not an air raid type guy. When you have one of the best running backs in all of FCS right behind you, you don't need to throw for 300 plus yards every game. He only threw for over 200 yards 4 times. Once was against Drake in week 3. But he truly doesn't turn over the ball that often. He really doesn't. And if Drake's defense can force a couple of turnovers, that would be crucial and huge this weekend. But it's going to be really tough against a senior and a veteran as strong as Aiden Bowman. And then you heard me mention he's got the best running back in the FCS right behind him. He's the best running back in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And honestly, as a sophomore, I don't know how you don't put him in the conversation for best in the entire FCS. LJ Phillips Jr., a sophomore, 1,554 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns, 100 plus yards in 3 of the last 4 games. I mean, if you love running backs, tune in on Saturday. This is going to be and they're both young. You have the true freshman out of Drake and Nick Herman, who just exploded for 253 yards last week against Morehead State. Almost single-handedly won the game offensively for Drake against Morehead State. He's been incredible. LJ Phillips, a sophomore who was a backup, was the second choice for South Dakota at the start of the year. He is just putting on a show week in and week out. And so Drake's front line definitely going to be tested against LJ Phillips Jr. He had 143 yards, 4 touchdowns against the Bulldogs in week 3. And then, Aiden Bowman, he has those 300 yards and has been able to control the air game because he has one of the best wide receivers in the league too. You have Lorenzo Fenner, a sophomore, 769 yards, 11 touchdowns. Against Drake, he only caught the ball twice, only got targeted twice, and both were for touchdowns, over 100 yards versus Drake. He's 8th in the Missouri Valley Football Conference with 130 yards, 3 touchdowns in the last performance against SIU. One of those guys where you know exactly who I'm talking about. Those Jeremiah Smith type players where quarterbacks, it doesn't matter. Just toss it up and you have full confidence as a reporter, as a fan, a coach, that he's going to be able to make a play on the ball. That's the type of guy Bowman and the Coyotes have with Fenner out there on the edges. And then defensively as a whole, South Dakota, they're good. They're a good defense, but kind of middle of the pack. They rank around, 6 in just about every category in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. 6 in total yards allowed, 6 in rushing yards allowed, 6 versus the pass, 7th in interceptions caused, 9th in sacks by, and 6th in opponents' third down conversions. So their defense is good. I'm not trying to make it sound like they're, Drake's going to be able to just carve up this defense. No, South Dakota, they've been able to, win these games and control these games. And it really, it starts on that defensive line that they have to be able to force teams like South Dakota State to only put up, around 17 points. Multiple opponents only putting up around 13 points this year. And so they're a good defense. Just when you look on paper, kind of middle of the pack, a defense there for the Coyotes. And on Wednesday, you heard Woodley say that the margins are razor thin in the FCS playoffs. And so I'm going to go through kind of the areas, the margins that I believe could change the outcome for the Drake Bulldogs in their favor if they're just able to tweak these few things. First and foremost, third downs. Drake has really struggled to convert on third down. They're 8 of 30 in their last 3 games. Now, on a positive note, South Dakota's defense, that again is kind of a middle of the pack defense in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. They're good, but it's not like they're the identity of the Coyotes. That's more on the offensive end of the ball. Their defense has allowed their last 3 opponents to convert 47% of their third downs, 17 of 36. So that's a positive trend for the Drake Bulldog offense that has struggled to get those first downs. Secondly, a quick start for Drake is crucial this weekend. Bulldogs in their last 3 games are being outscored 21-7 in the first 15 minutes of the game. Drake, if you go back to that week 3 loss to South Dakota, a big reason the Bulldogs fell is because they dug themselves into a hole too early. Miscommunications on defense, too many turnovers early, allowed the Coyotes to go up 28-7 at the half. And with the FCS playoffs on the line, trying to advance, this is a weekend where if Drake starts off slow, this South Dakota offense is so talented and so strong that digging yourself into a deep hole, it's going to be really, really difficult to claw back out of. And now, all of these are definitely easier said than done. And this one probably more than the rest is just trying to get a balanced offensive game plan. Kyle Kemp goes in each and every weekend wanting balance on that offensive side of the ball, but we just haven't seen it. Drake, the last 2 games, the passing game has basically been non-existent 45 yards versus Morehead State, 59 yards against Dayton. But they continue to win because of their strong offensive line play and because of their running back in Nick Herman, who is just absolutely incredible. So if the Bulldogs are able to improve in those areas while continuing to just impact the game with their run game and have that defense as strong as it's performed all season long, then you definitely have a chance to pull off this upset in South Dakota in the FCS playoffs. This one could easily get exciting. These teams are not the same teams we saw 2 months ago. Both have really improved in some major spots. I think Drake at quarterback, I know I just mentioned the passing game has struggled for Drake, but Logan Inagawa, he's proven that he has the confidence and he has the poise. In a snowy, crappy weather game against St. Thomas, which Drake did lose at home, he was not nervous. He made some mistakes, but it didn't ruin the whole game for him. It wasn't like one interception and now Logan's panicking and doesn't know where to throw the ball. No, he threw one interception, shrugged it off, and then Drake had an opportunity multiple times to win that game in the final minutes. Same with Nick Herman. We just saw it last week. Fumbles the ball twice and still goes out there in that second half and performs an absolute beautiful game with 253 yards rushing. This game has the possibility to be very exciting. I know people are going to look at Drake and see a non-scholarship type program going up against an 11 seed, and they're going to look at what happened in week 3. This one, I truly believe is going to be exciting. Plus, it doesn't hurt when you have Coach Woodley with that 13-5 postseason record behind you. So, Drake kicks off at noon against South Dakota in the first round of the FCS playoffs. We will, of course, be covering that game, so follow along on Twitter at Media Row Pod, as we'll be giving our insights and just in-game updates as well. Sticking with the Drake Bulldog conversation before we move on to our national college football talk, going to the basketball court as it's Thanksgiving week. I mean, all week long we've been watching this Players Era festival or whatever you want to call it. I feel like I've seen 3 different names where Iowa State is looking absolutely dominant. You had Iowa the other night take down Ole Miss, and it's just Thanksgiving week is chef's kiss. Beautiful. You have so many great games. Thanksgiving, you had, Michigan State, North Carolina. Doesn't get much better than that. But tonight, a huge one for the Drake Bulldogs as they tip off against an undefeated LSU Tigers squad in the Emerald Coast Classic. First true test for LSU. Again, they really haven't played anyone great. The best team they have played is very similar to a Drake caliber team, is Omaha. And they handled them at home. This LSU team, you see the 5-0 record, you see the logo, you see the SEC badge, you automatically go, they're going to handle this. Not necessarily. I think we're still learning about both of these teams for sure, but you're just waiting to see who this LSU team is truly built of. And so I think they're going to be tested against Drake. Drake has the size to compete with them. Now, is it just, can Drake actually utilize that size? Because we've seen smaller teams really give Drake some fits, on the rebounding side of things, in the paint. But Drake has improved in these last 2 games. Also, I mentioned the SEC badge. It's not like Drake and these, the Bulldog fans are afraid of the SEC. Drake, 3-0 versus the SEC in the last 3 meetings. Can you guys guess them? They've been pretty recent. I think you'll be able to get the first 2. I think the third one might take you a second. But the last game Drake won before this season was in the NCAA tournament. Round 1 against Missouri, so there's win 1 against an SEC opponent. Win 2, same year is when Bennett Sturts and all those guys went down to Charleston and won the whole thing. They beat Vanderbilt in the championship. Now, here's the one that is a few years ago. Mississippi State in 2022. The team that would go on to win the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, go to the NCAA tournament as an automatic qualifier for the first time since that magical 07-08 year. That was the same year. So they beat Mississippi State. That was the first time. They also wore those. I loved them. I know fans didn't, but they wore the gray alternate jerseys that, they didn't say Drake on it. They just had the Bulldog and the D, I loved those alternates. Now, the 1969 Final Four Baby Blues, the script, you can't beat those. Those are the best alternates. But that was the last time Drake beat an SEC opponent. They're 3-0 against these teams, so they're not afraid of that badge whatsoever. But now to really dive in to tonight's game, where it's Coach Henderson, brand new squad, going up against an undefeated LSU squad. The biggest factor that I think will determine the outcome of tonight's game is the rebounding matchup. We hinted at it, at the start of this segment of talking about how Drake has the size. They absolutely have the size to compete with any Power 4 team, where you have guys like Federico and Carr, and even Griff has been playing really well as a freshman in the post. They have the size to compete, but we've seen it waver from time to time. First game against Northern Arizona, Drake had the size advantage, and it was a battle in the paint and on the boards. They didn't control those parts of the game. You look at LSU. LSU hasn't wavered once on the glass. Listen to this stat. And again, they haven't really played anyone yet. The Omaha's the closest to a Drake they've played. But these numbers are doing what they need to do against the teams that they're going up against. LSU has won the rebounding battle by 10 plus in every game and by 15 plus in 3 of the 5 games. They have just been dominant on the glass. They can control the game just from those extra possessions from the glass, not allowing teams to get extra possessions. I think another huge thing is just seeing this Drake offense. These last few weeks, we are seeing it start to gel. I mentioned it on Monday's show of we're starting to see it gel as an entire unit. We had seen, against Northern Arizona, Jaysean Thomas. He was the guy where everyone was like, oh wow, okay. We are introduced now to Thomas. Then he has struggled, been hot and cold since. And then you have Braden Applehans coming off the bench, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe that's the 6th man that gets this offense jump-started. Well, then he's been hot and cold. And then you have Jalen Quinn, where you sit there and go, man, just the way he's built. He is built like a star. Like, he's got the size, the length, the versatility. He's fast, tenacious on defense. He is built like a star for the Valley. But then he has struggled, been hot and cold. Sometimes he comes out slow. And so early on, we're seeing these ISO offensive attacks. We're seeing these, only 9 assists in an entire game, box score. And these last 2 haven't been that story. Drake, over 11 threes in the last 2 games. They've had season highs in assists in each of the last 2 games. They had 7 players score 10 plus against BVU. They're starting to get that outside attack. They're starting to gel as a unit. And the rebounding numbers, I think, will just really determine tonight's game. I'm really excited to see where this team stacks up against an undefeated LSU team. You can call me a homer. You can call me biased. I still have a lot of faith in Hendo and this team. It's 6 games into the year. I think this is really going to show early on where Drake stacks up, because you're starting to see Bradley turn it around. They weren't looking strong at the start. Drake very similar boat. The two teams that played for the Valley Championship last year that lost a lot this year started off slow, and you can't blame them. Brand new, for Bradley, they lost a lot of their roster. For Drake, they lost almost their entire roster and entire coaching staff. So I still have a ton of confidence in Henderson, and I'm just so eager to see what happens this weekend. Win or lose, Drake will play on Saturday, and they will play either Georgia Tech or DePaul. Too bad our guy Connor Enright wasn't still at DePaul. Would have had a fun return against his former team in the Bulldogs, but they will play either Georgia Tech or DePaul on Saturday. So 8:30 tip-off will be covering, of course, so same as the football. Just make sure you're following along on Twitter. All right, now let's get to our college football picks. Huge weekend, rivalry weekend for college football. And we're going to start off with the local games here first. You have Iowa at Nebraska, big rivalry game. Monday Night Football, you have SVP talking with George Kittle, and George Kittle throwing some shade at, the Bussin' with the Boys on Barstool and Nebraska. You love rivalry weekend. You absolutely love it. I have Iowa winning this game because these are just games Kirk doesn't lose. I mean, what? They haven't lost in Nebraska since 2011. Was that the stat? And here's the biggest reason I'm picking Iowa. Nebraska let me down. Nebraska let me down. Matt Rule let me down. Remember at the start of the year, preseason shows, where I'm talking about teams, man, I might buy stock into certain teams. I picked Nebraska as my team to buy stock in. And I said, I know, when you look at the logo, when you look at the history, your gut goes, hell no. That's Nebraska. They're going to find a way to screw it up. And I said, no. Matt Rule, look at his history. The third year, every time he coaches a team, man, they really change it around. They have 9+ wins. Look at the schedule Nebraska has. They should easily win. And then Dylan Raiola, man, I don't love him, but I think he's a very talented quarterback. He could easily lead Nebraska to 9 wins. I'm never picking Nebraska again. Everything I told you guys not to worry about in that preseason show of don't worry about the history. You're letting the logo affect you. Look on paper. Yeah, Nebraska absolutely let me down. And I bought into what was on paper, and I should have known just by looking at that logo that Nebraska was going to find a way to really Nebraska this whole thing. So give me the Iowa Hawkeyes winning once again in Lincoln. And then on Saturday, you have Iowa State, final game of the year, going up against Oklahoma State. First and foremost, your boy, if you're a Cyclone fan, your boy Rocco is back. 18 of 23, 241 yards, 3 touchdowns, and biggest stat of all, no interceptions. He had thrown an interception in 4 straight games, tallying up to 7 interceptions in total in those 4 straight. So it's not even just 1 interception, it's multiple in those games. He looked back to his old self where he looked confident with every throw. He was accurate with every throw. He was scrambling and still being accurate. He had his eyes downfield the whole time. The offensive line has improved. You have the running game really improving. Iowa State, that performance I know is against Kansas, but still, just with everything they've been through, you look at that performance and as a Cyclone fan, you go, that's what we've been waiting for. That's the team we know we could have played like all year long. So I like Iowa State. Again, Oklahoma State is a shell of itself. It's a mess. If you lose to Oklahoma State, there's some major issues happening in Saturday's game for Iowa State to lose. So give me the Cyclones and by $1 million if they bring back the Cy-NATO for a second straight weekend. All right, let's get into now the national games. Huge, huge games. Let's start in the SEC. You have number 3 Texas A&M at 17 Texas. A&M down 30-3, and you come back and win that game. That is a championship level team. Those are games good teams, great teams lose. They lose those games. Championship level teams win those. And that's what Texas A&M did. I think, if they would have dominated SC going on the road at Texas, I'd be like, man, it's been a long season. You're top 3 in the college football playoff poll. What are you going to stub your toe once? I think, honestly, the way they struggled against South Carolina is a positive going into this weekend. It's almost like a wake-up call for Texas A&M. And again, I think Manning has improved. The defense is still very good for Texas, but they just, when I watch them, I don't have that sense of that's a great team. That's a championship level team. Being in Austin, being at home is huge for this game. You don't have to deal with the 12th man, but I still like Texas A&M to win this one on the road against Texas. Now to finish up. Punches being thrown. Will flags be planted? M's have been crossed out. The game. The greatest rivalry in college sports. Ohio State, the number 1 team in the country, traveling to Ann Arbor to face number 15 Michigan. I know the storylines. I know Ohio State has lost 4 straight. I know the Buckeyes haven't won in Ann Arbor since 2020. I understand Ryan Day can't win these games. He's 1-4 in the last 5. Year after year, it feels like on paper, Ohio State puts out the best product by far. Maybe outside of 2023, of course, when Michigan won the national title. But other than that, Ohio State always seems to have the better squad. And they get embarrassed by Michigan. But not this year. It's not going to happen again this year. Ryan Day, I think, has a huge weight lifted off of his shoulders, winning the national title a year ago. Now, I understand if you're going to talk about, future, is he going to be a Hall of Famer? What will he be recognized, in the state of Ohio? You have to win this game against Michigan. You have to start stacking up wins against your bitter rival. I understand that. But that weight of winning a title is lifted off. He's going to have, more than likely, both Tate and Smith have been, it's been said that they should be good to go this weekend. And then on top of that, Sang is playing at a Heisman caliber level. You have the 3rd and 4th string wide receiver, I think, could carve up this middle of the pack Michigan secondary. But most importantly, Ohio State wins this game because defense travels. And Ohio State's defense has been the most impressive key to this Ohio State success all season long. They bend but don't break. Sure, Michigan might be able to get a couple of big runs or big throws throughout the game, but you better hope you score on those, because if you get in the red zone, this Ohio State defense locks in. And I think they lock in and they take down Michigan and finish off what has been an amazing regular season for a team that just got back from winning the national title. So give me Ohio State in the game. Absolutely a fun weekend planned. We have Drake tonight at 8:30. You have Iowa, Nebraska as well today. And then just a fun weekend of rivalry football games, playoff football games, and then just more great Thanksgiving week college basketball games. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to the show each and every week. We greatly appreciate it. And again, I know I said this on Wednesday, but I'll say it again. in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I am so thankful for each and every one of you, for your support. We're gaining more traction each and every week. You guys have been messaging me on Twitter. We've had great interactions, and it's starting to feel like how I knew Media Row could turn out to be, where it's a close-knit group and everyone's welcome, and just really appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you to the listeners. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Thank you to Kelly's Little Nipper, as always, for following and for being a sponsor and a believer of Media Row. And then thank you to Coach Woodley for hopping on this week as well. We will see you guys on Monday as we recap another huge weekend in sports.